There was a morning when the world seemed unusually still. He stood at the edge of a quiet field, the air soft and cool, and for a moment he thought he could hear the earth itself breathing. The light was gentle, spilling across the grass in thin golden threads, touching the tops of wildflowers and the edges of the distant trees. He did not move at first. He simply allowed himself to exist in the pause, letting the quiet settle around him like a soft blanket. He noticed the small things that usually went unnoticed. The way the wind bent the grass in tiny waves, how the sunlight glimmered on a dewdrop balanced precariously on a leaf, how the branches of an old tree swayed with a measured rhythm. He felt a stirring inside him, something he could not yet name. It was a feeling both heavy and tender, a weight that pressed softly against his chest, as if urging him to notice more, to feel more. For a long time, he had believed that life demanded constant action, that each thought must be spoken, each feeling must be displayed, each intention must be seen, and yet, in this quiet, he began to sense the possibility of another way. Could it be that stillness itself had meaning? Could silence carry a kind of weight that words could not? He turned slowly, allowing his eyes to follow the curve of the hills, the way the mist hung low over the valley, the way shadows lengthened and stretched. Everything seemed to move, and yet nothing moved at all. The quiet was not empty. It was full of presence, full of watching, full of life that did not announce itself. It was as if the world had taken a breath, and he had been invited to do the same. A small bird landed nearby, its wings shaking off the morning dew. He watched it for a while, noticing how it moved with careful precision, how it paused, as though listening to something only it could hear. There was no hurry in its movements, there was no need to impress, and yet there was a quiet confidence in its being. He felt something shift inside him. Could he also move through the world without needing to prove himself? Could he simply be, and that be enough? The stillness began to make him aware of his own thoughts. They were not racing as they often did, demanding responses and conclusions. They were soft now, gentle, curling around each other like smoke. Questions arose, not loudly but as whispers. Why does silence feel so strange? Why does stillness feel both comforting and unsettling? Is it possible to sit here and simply let the world be without fear? He noticed the tension in his body, the way his shoulders had always carried a quiet weight, the way his hands had always fidgeted when left alone. He allowed himself to feel it fully, without trying to fix it, without trying to escape. It was uncomfortable, yes, but not cruel. It was honest. And there was a kind of relief in that honesty, a small light flickering in a space he had long neglected. Time seemed to stretch and fold in this quiet. A minute could last an hour, and an hour could feel like a single breath. He felt the strange and tender sensation of being both very small and very large at once. The world moved around him, but he was not moved by it. He was present, fully, quietly, and that presence felt like a beginning he had never known. He realized that this silence was not empty. It held a subtle power, the kind that grows slowly, imperceptibly, like roots spreading beneath the soil. It asked nothing from him. It offered no applause. It did not demand attention or action. And yet, in its gentle way, it was teaching him something profound. It was showing him that to exist without reacting, to breathe without rushing, to feel without naming was its own kind of strength. He let himself lean into that knowledge, allowing it to touch him, softening the corners of his mind and heart. The air carried the faint scent of earth and grass, the kind that settles in your chest when you pause long enough to notice. He breathed in slowly, exhaling carefully, letting each breath mark a rhythm he had almost forgotten. And in that rhythm he felt a whisper of something deeper, a quiet understanding that life did not always require his intervention. That peace could be found simply by being present, by noticing, by listening to the stillness. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the light warm his face, letting the quiet settle into his bones, and he realized that he had been waiting for this all along, though he did not know it. Waiting not for words or explanations, not for applause or understanding, but for a moment like this. A moment in which the world stood still and he could stand with it quietly, gently, fully alive. There were moments when the silence felt heavier than any harsh word. He would stand there, listening to what was not being said, and feel the weight of it settle in his chest. They spoke around him, not to him. They decided who he was without asking, and in that quiet space where he might have explained himself, nothing came out. Not because he had nothing to say, but because something inside him hesitated. At first, the silence felt like loss, like something had been taken from him. He replayed their words in his mind, slow and careful, wondering how they had reached such conclusions. He wondered if he had missed a chance to correct them. He wondered if staying quiet made him weak. These thoughts did not shout, they whispered, and whispers can last a long time. Each time he chose not to respond, the space inside him tightened. It felt unnatural to let misunderstanding sit there, untouched. There is a deep human pull to be seen clearly, to be known. When that does not happen, the heart starts to ache in quiet ways. He felt that ache. He felt it when the room went still. He felt it when they walked away, satisfied with their version of him. Silence in those moments was not peaceful. It was uncomfortable. It asked questions without words. Why does this matter so much? Why does their view of me feel heavier than my own? Why does not reacting feel like I am disappearing? These questions did not demand answers. They simply stayed hovering like smoke that does not clear. He noticed something else too. When he stayed silent, they filled the space quickly. Assumptions rushed in, judgments grew bold. It was as if his quiet made them louder. And that hurt. It is difficult to be still while others decide your shape for you. It is difficult to watch your meaning be bent without touching it. Yet within that discomfort, something subtle began to form, a small awareness. He began to observe himself more closely. He noticed the urge to defend, how quickly it rose, how it tightened his jaw, how it pulled at his breath. He noticed how familiar that urge was, how often it had guided him before, and he saw where it usually led. More noise, more explaining, more exhaustion. In the silence, he also noticed the passing of time, how moments stretched, then softened, how the ache did not stay sharp forever. It changed, it dulled, it moved deeper, becoming something quieter. He realized that not every misunderstanding grows worse if left alone. Some simply lose their strength when not fed. Being misunderstood revealed a strange truth, that much of his pain did not come from what they believed, but from his need to correct it, from his hope that clarity would bring relief. Sitting with that realization was not easy. It felt like letting go of a shield he had carried for years. There was a loneliness in this stage, a sense of standing apart, watching rather than engaging. But it was not empty. It was filled with noticing. He noticed his breath slowing when he did not speak. He noticed his body relaxing when he accepted that he could not control their thoughts. He noticed a thin line of calm beneath the discomfort, waiting. The silence did not fix anything right away. It did not make him feel noble or strong. It simply showed him where he was still tied to approval, where he was still hoping to be understood by those who were not listening, and seeing that truth even gently changed something inside him. He began to understand that silence can be a mirror. It reflects not only how others treat us, but how deeply we trust ourselves. And in that quiet reflection he remained, uncomfortable but present, learning what it meant to stay without disappearing. Over time, the silence began to change its shape. It no longer pressed so hard against his chest. It no longer felt like something missing. Instead, it became a space he could step into, a space where nothing was demanded of him, no explanation, no defense, just presence. He noticed that when he stopped preparing answers in his mind, his thoughts grew slower. They moved with less urgency. There was no rush to arrive anywhere, and in that slowness he began to hear things he had missed before. Not voices from outside, but a quieter knowing from within. It did not speak in full sentences. It came as feelings, as small shifts, as a steady sense of balance. He realized that much of his earlier pain came from believing that being understood was necessary for being whole. That belief had guided him for a long time. It had shaped how he spoke, how he reacted, how he measured himself. Seeing it clearly was unsettling, but it was also freeing. If being understood was no longer the goal, what remained? What remained was a simple awareness of himself, his values, his limits, his quiet dignity. These things did not need agreement to exist. They did not grow stronger when defended loudly. In fact, he saw that they often weakened when he tried too hard to protect them. Silence, strangely, seemed to give them room. There were moments when he was tempted to test this realization, to break the quiet and see what would happen, to offer a few words carefully chosen, hoping they might shift how he was seen. Sometimes he did speak, and when he did, he noticed the difference. He spoke more slowly, with fewer words, without the familiar tension in his shoulders. He was not trying to convince. He was simply sharing Hat felt true, and if it was not received, he let it rest. He began to understand that silence was not absence. It was a form of choice, a way of saying without sound that not every thought deserved his energy, that not every moment required his response. This understanding did not arrive suddenly. It unfolded quietly, like light spreading across a room at dawn. They still misunderstood him at times. That did not stop. But it no longer felt like a personal failure. He saw that people often hear through the shape of their own expectations. He could not rearrange those shapes for them. And accepting that truth softened something deep inside him. With this acceptance came a subtle strength. Not the kind that announces itself, but the kind that stays steady. He noticed it when he listened more than he spoke, when he felt no urge to interrupt, when he allowed pauses to exist without filling them. These moments felt grounded, honest, real. He also noticed how silence protected him. It kept him from saying things he might later wish he had held back. It gave his emotions time to settle before turning into words. In that space, feelings lost some of their sharp edges. They became easier to carry, easier to understand. There was a quiet respect that grew within him. Not pride, not superiority, just a calm recognition of his own boundaries. He did not need to step into every conversation. He did not need to answer every question. Choosing when to remain silent felt like choosing himself. At night, when the world grew still, he reflected on how different he felt. Not lighter exactly, but clearer, as if the noise he once carried had slowly been set down. He had not solved a airy question. He had not reached perfect peace, but he had found something steady to stand on. Silence, he realized, was not something to fear. It was something to learn from. It showed him where his power truly lived, not in reaction, not in proving, but in the quiet certainty of knowing who he was even when no one else did. In time, the quiet became a place he could rest. It no longer felt like something he endured. It felt chosen. He did not wake each day thinking about what might be said or misunderstood. His attention turned inward, not in a closed way, but in a gentle, settled way. The kind that allows the heart to breathe. He noticed how little was actually required of him, how many moments passed without needing a reaction at all. The world moved, they spoke, assumptions came and went, and he remained, not distant, just rooted, like something that knows where it belongs and does not need to prove it. There was a freedom in this stillness, not excitement, not escape, just freedom from unnecessary weight. He no longer felt pulled to explain every silence or soften every edge. He understood that his calm did not depend on their understanding. It came from his own alignment, quiet and steady. Sometimes memories of the past surfaced. Times when he had reacted quickly, when words had spilled out before he had a chance to listen to himself. He did not judge those moments now. He saw them as part of the path. Each reaction had shown him something. Each regret had pointed him toward restraint. And restraint, he learned, was not about holding back. It was about holding steady. There was a quiet power in knowing when to speak and when to remain still. This power did not seek attention. It did not need to be recognized. It was felt in the body, in the ease of his breath, in the way his thoughts no longer raced ahead of him. He trusted himself more. That trust settled deep, like a stone placed carefully at the center of a circle. They still formed their own stories. He allowed them to. He understood now that correcting every misunderstanding would only pull him back into noise. Silence, when chosen with care, protected what mattered most: his sense of self, his respect for his own inner world. He found peace in small moments, in the way light changed across a quiet room, in the sound of his own steps, in the simple act of being present without expectation. These moments did not feel empty. They felt full in a gentle way, as if nothing more was needed. The need to be seen softened. Not because he felt invisible, but because he felt complete. He no longer measured his worth through reactions or responses. He measured it through how calmly he could remain when nothing was resolved. And that calm surprised him. It was deeper than he had imagined. Silence became his companion, not his shelter. It walked beside him, steady and honest. It reminded him that strength does not always move outward. Sometimes it gathers inward, growing quiet roots that hold everything else in place. There was no final victory, no moment where everything made sense. Life continued in its gentle, uncertain way. But within that uncertainty, he stood with ease. He did not rush to fill gaps with words. He let pauses exist. He let moments pass without claiming them. In that way, he remained whole. Not untouched but unbroken, not loud but clear. He carried his peace without display, knowing it was his to keep. And as the night settled around him, the quiet felt kind. It asked nothing. It offered nothing more than space. And in that space he rested, fully present, quietly strong.